Hello, and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And in this fortnight's episode, we will be looking at long-awaited yet curiously unwanted sci-fi sequel Blade Runner 2049, and we'll be asking our usual supplementary question, which this time is, are human-looking robots a good idea, really? All that to come in probably a handful of minutes, but before all that, Alastair, what have you been doing since last time, other than building your human-looking robot?
I've been reading a novella, the new novella in the Peter Grant series.
Ah, you bastard, I need to read that.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, regular listeners will remember that probably about this time last year, we reviewed the sixth Peter Grant novel, The Hanging Tree. Peter Grant is a London-based Metropolitan Police detective, but he's also an apprentice wizard and works for the division of the Metropolitan Police that investigates magical crime or unusual goings-on in London. I've been reading that. It's really good. Yeah, obviously quite a bit shorter than a normal novel, but it does contain all the kind of essential elements of a Peter Grant story, and I did really enjoy it.
Regular listeners will, I'm sure, know by now, because I think we've covered it in some form at least twice at this point, or mentioned it in some way, but we do enjoy the Rivers of London series, the Peter Grant saga. Its mix of magic and crime does very much do it for us. So yeah, I'll definitely be reading this at some stage, but because I'm not as bang on schedule as Alastair, I haven't yet got round to it.
It's a good story. There's occasionally a few bits when the plot moves along quite snippily, when you kind of think, what if this was a full novel? And they might have lingered longer over that or gone into more detail about how they made that particular connection. But because it's a novella, they have to kind of quickly skip to the next plot point. But they still get all the stuff in there that you want from the story. So
yeah, I mean, Ivanovich seems quite happy to think, right, well, we're doing a crime story, so that means we can, as well as these big novels that advance the mythos, we can just do these little side crimes. Because there's a monthly comic series, or it's a series of mini-series, but yeah, there's ongoing comics set in the Rivers of London universe as well. So he seems quite happy to, just keep doing supplementary Rivers of London stories to tide people over during the slowly increasing gaps between the novels.
Yeah, and they expand the universe and bring in more and unusual different things. And I don't want to say too much about this, because obviously you've not read it, Nick, and our listeners may be also looking forward to reading it. But there are a few semi-major or major plot developments. There's definitely a few things that kind of move the overall plot of the series on a bit, which is quite interesting. Focusing on some more minor characters, but then moving their plots along. So yeah, there is progression, as well as this having a self-contained story.
Cool. I mean, I was obviously going to read it anyway, but good that I probably should. I must admit, the main thing that stopped me reading it the moment it came out was the fact that it's weirdly expensive for a novella.
It's kind of novel price, pretty much.
Yeah, it's like £7 on Kindle and £9 in hardback, according to Amazon as I speak, which is quite expensive for something that's not a full novel. I guess that's ultimately because the Rivers of London series is a great big smash hit. So I guess that's what happens when you're successful. And as we like the series, I can't even really say it's undeserved success. I can just say that's quite expensive for a novella, and I'll probably drag my feet on it a bit in the hope that the price will come down.
Yeah, it is expensive for a novella, but I'm really pleased that there's new material coming out, as there's no full novel this year.
I'm sure I'll work it out. Maybe a library will get it. Maybe I'll actually go to my local library. That is definitely an option.
Ooh, anyway, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, since we last spoke, first up, cards on the table for those who listen to the sort of post-theme song tag of our last episode. No, I didn't really get to listening to much Pink Floyd. I listened to a few tracks, then sort of trailed off, so never mind. But an album I have been listening to is Exile in the Outer Ring by EMA. This was recommended to be in Warren Ellis's weekly newsletter, Orbital Operations. So, recommended to his thousands of followers, not to me specifically. But still, this is an album by EMA, who apparently is the recording name of Erica M. Anderson. It's a strange sort of surreal synthy folk pop album about, I think about how it feels to be sort of in America at the moment. And I think there's some autobiographical stuff as well, but yeah, it's just very good. For lack of a better term, it sort of swirls and creates this sort of slow building story, and there's a lot of real sort of vitriol in it. I've been listening to a lot of solo female artists with synths lately. It seems to be my current musical thing, but this is one of the best albums in that oeuvre I've heard. This is Yeah, I'll probably put a clip of it in the next sort of dividing section in the podcast, because that seems to be what I do when I talk about music. But yeah, I've actually been listening to this for a month or two, but with music I always find I don't really know if I actually like it in a sort of permanent way until I've had it with me for a while. So unless I'm doing something like in the past when we've forced ourselves to have opinions of music quite quickly for the podcast, it does tend to take me a few weeks to actually think, okay, rather than just listening to it a few times and thinking, yeah, that seems good. It's actually stuck with me in a sort of ongoing way. So yeah, if you like your sort of swirling synth music, it's very good. It also, as a vibe, fits quite well with Blade Runner 2049.
Is it quite overtly political?
Yes, I believe there's a song called Aryan Nation.
Yeah, we know this is a album that wears its politics on its sleeve.
Yeah, there's some anger. As I say, there's some autobiographical stuff as well. There's some relationship breakdown stuff, which is quite sort of raw and sad as well. It's just very good. It's very sort of a good album for the moment. I would recommend giving it a go. If anything I've said sounds interesting, I know it's on Spotify, because that's where I've been listening to it. I was going to qualify that statement for no reason. But yes, it is probably one of the best records I've heard this year. It's certainly the one that's stuck with me and resonated with me the most, so I thought it was finally time to bring it to the podcast and try and use what little sad platform I have to get it out to a wider audience.
Sounds good. I'm certainly interested in listening to it.
For 7 years I let you waste me before I could finally face it. 7 years of isolation. 7 years.
Our main review this episode is Blade Runner 2049, set 30 years after the original, where a new Blade Runner, K, played by Ryan Gosling, is hunting the few remaining Nexus 8s in a bleak, futuristic Los Angeles. In the course of his hunt, he uncovers the body of a replicant who died in childbirth. Fearing that this mystery could bring down all of society, K embarks on a mission to find the identity of the missing child. This is a mission that puts him on the trail of former Blade Runner Decker, played by Harrison Ford. But Nick, what did you think of it?
It was good, which seems like a given now that we've seen it, and the critical consensus seems to have settled on, yeah, it's pretty good. But no one seemed to think it would be beforehand. Certainly, you've been telling me for much of the year that we have to cover this because it's very significant in your sort of cultural world, but you weren't convinced it was actually going to be any good. So, I'm pleased to report that, yeah, this is quite good, despite the fact that it's a sequel to a film that didn't really need a sequel, which has not been something that's done well for, quality in the last couple of years. But on this occasion, there seems to be a real sort of level of craft and vision going on here that seems to have worked. It's got this sort of slow, swirling, stunning vision of the future which just sort of drags you in, and there's actually an interesting plot and themes in its own right, rather than just raking up the corpse of Blade Runner and poking it a bit. This is a long film. It's 3 hours. It's the best part of 3 hours. I think it's 2 3/4. And it doesn't really feel like a slog. It doesn't meander all the place. I probably wouldn't go quite as far as saying tight as fuck, because it does take its time and talk around a bit, but all the scenes advance the plot. There's very little sign that we're going on a little diversion now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it certainly exceeded my expectations. You are right that this year, so far I've been saying we have to cover the new Blade Runner because I love the original Blade Runner, and it's like a seminal film, possibly the best film that came out in the 1980s. It's an amazing film, but yeah, like I say, there's been a wave of unnecessary sequels over the last, 10 or so years. I was preparing myself to be disappointed by a Blade Runner sequel. For example, I thought it would go something like Alien Covenant, which we covered earlier this year. Had a few nice explanatory bits for people interested in the alien universe, but was kind of a unnecessary additional complication plus quite dull film. But yeah, Blade Runner is, none of those things. It's really atmospheric, it's really engrossing, it's beautiful to look at, it's got a really interesting plot, it's well acted, it expands the universe of Blade Runner, and brings in more detail, which is really good, but not in a way that tramples all over the original or makes the original somehow less valid or less interesting. So yeah, having low expectations meant in this case that my expectations were exceeded.
Yeah, which maybe shouldn't be a massive surprise to us, considering this is directed by Denis Villeneuve, who of course also directed Arrival, that we were shoveling praise on last year.
Yeah.
So maybe it shouldn't be a huge surprise, but yes, Modern Fantasy Violence once again enjoyed a Denis Villeneuve film.
Yeah, but he's a very good director, and yeah, like I say, Arrival was a great film, probably one of the best films that came out last year, and yeah, he's a safe pair of hands. But sometimes it's just like Blade Runner is such an iconic film, and it's so hard to live up to that. Great directors can be hamstringed by bad plots, studios that are desperate to get just a kind of a money-spinning sequel out of a beloved film, or the fact that Blade Runner itself didn't really particularly lend itself to any kind of sequel or continuation, but they managed to find an interesting way to do that.
Well, yeah, and also it feels fairly sort of contemporary, as into now. It doesn't... Although there is a lot of sort of nods to the fact that this is the continuation of a future from the 80s. I'm not going to say what the nods are because it feels kind of weird to spoil the film when I don't have to. But yeah, there are a few fun little sort of companies and stuff that were a big deal in Blade Runner because they were a big deal in the 80s and now aren't really a big deal at all but still come up in this film as a sort of a little nod.
Yeah.
And there's sort of lots of very sort of gentle nods, but it does feel like a contemporary film. It does have the sort of all the glossy special effects beauty of it. It has a plot which moves fairly sharply through a lot of its beats. I mean, to be honest, having dealt with Alastair's baggage on this film, mine, of course, is that I saw Blade Runner for the first time for the Moderate Fantasy Violence recommendations section, I think a few months ago now. And as those who actually listened to that episode, or who go back and listen to it now, will tell, I thought it was a well put together film, but it didn't really wow me or massively resonate with me. It was fine. It was an interesting background research experience, but I didn't really fall in love with the film. Yeah, interesting, I did really like this. Perhaps not quite to a blew me away, fall in love with it sense, but I did think this was a really amazingly atmospheric, immersive film. As I say, I sort of got swept away on it and it didn't feel like 3 hours at all. We saw it in IMAX. This is definitely a film which does well in IMAX. It's like huge and overpoweringly sort of, all the sort of big, beautiful scenes. It's very sort of easy to just get lost in. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood the particular day I sat down on my sofa to watch Blade Runner on my telly. I suspect saying I think this is better than Blade Runner is probably in some way controversial or flat out wrong, but as of my recent viewings I definitely enjoyed it more. I don't know, is this more plot driven than Blade Runner? Did this sort of bring the plot a bit more to the forefront? It felt like it somehow did, but I might just have been, as I say, more in the mood.
I think the original Blade Runner probably does meander a bit more. The plot of the original is more straightforward than this one, in that, Decker is a Blade Runner. He has to retire these 4 replicants. He sort of hunts them down pretty much in order. And then there's like side plots in that there's the escaped replicants trying to confront their creator. There's the plot line of him meeting this new replicant who's more aware and intelligent than previous replicants and also believes that she's human. So there's quite a lot of different plot threads, whereas this film pretty much just has one plot thread, the investigation that Kay is going on. It's much more tightly focused on Kay's perspective, whereas, there are bits when they go to like other people's perspectives, such as Kay's boss or sort of the villains, the new company that's taken over from Tyrell in the creation of replicants. But really, this film sticks much closely to Kay's perspective, whereas the original Blade Runner did have a lot of perspectives of the other replicants and some of the other characters. Yeah, so I think that you're right, this is tighter, less meandering, and also more plot-driven in that the plot is more complicated because they're kind of sort of uncovering this kind of conspiracy, but also delving more into the world of Blade Runner, the background of it, who is involved in the creation of the replicants, and what's their relationship to their creations. Including like some quite creepy scenes with Jared Leto, who I thought was quite disappointing as the Joker in Suicide Squad last year, but he was very good playing a kind of creepy sort of slave master, the new creator of replicants.
Yeah, he was fine. I mean, he was only in 2 scenes. He did sort of little monologues about how evil he is.
Yeah.
He wasn't the most interesting part of the film to me. He felt a bit like you're sort of a slightly more general film villain in a film where the other characters were allowed to be a bit more interesting. I don't know whether there's a meta comment in there about the fact a lot of the characters in this film are replicants, and we spend a lot more time getting under the skin of the replicants, whereas the actual people often seem a bit one-dimensional. I mean,
yeah.
There's Jared Leto and there's the K character, Ryan Gosling's boss, who I think is only ever called Mom or Madam or something, who is played by Robin Wright. Who's played very well by Robin Wright, because Robin Wright is good. But yeah, she's quite a one-note character as well.
Yeah, the other thing that's quite different about this film to the original is there's no ambiguity about whether the new Blade Runner K is a replicant or not. It states very early on that he is a replicant. And I quite like that because the appeal of the first Blade Runner is so much around the ambiguity of whether Harrison Ford's character is a replicant or not. But if they try to recreate that this time, it would just seem like too much, kind of just trying to literally redo the original film. So I liked about this film the fact that they were unambiguous. Ryan Gosling's character is a replicant. It can explicitly explore the themes that the first one kind of subtly looked at, such as what is it like to be compelled to hunt down your own kind, and does he feel remorse from that? And obviously the fact that he gets very emotionally invested in finding the child of a of a replicant, as he pointed out, things that are born have souls. So the fact he gets emotionally invested in this says something about the character who's been forced to retire, in inverted commas, so many of his own kind.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most memorable elements in the first film was the scenes where often Harrison Ford just tracks down these replicants and just gunned them down, and it was just a bit sort of, wow. I mean, yes, technically they were robots, but that was just a picture of someone running up to someone and shooting them in the street, and that was always some of the most sort of haunting, stick-with-you type bits. And that gets brought up quite quickly in Blade Runner 2049, in that basically the first scene, very mild spoilers for first scene, I guess, is a sort of K doing his job and taking out a replicant. It's both a sort of a callback to those scenes, and as the replicants he's taking out quickly points out, also makes the new dilemma of the new film clear, because the replicant he's hunting has a go at him for taking out his own kind.
Yeah.
So yeah, that sets quite nicely out the stall, but this is the angle this time. It's about a replicant looking at humans and thinking, I am a replicant. What does that mean? And there are quite a lot of individual scenes which, although the film doesn't meander, a lot of the scenes are quite long and do give a lot of characters a chance to have a bit of a monologue about the role of memory and what it is to be human and what it is to be a replicant and so on. It is, as I think you said, free to talk about these things at a bit more length.
Yeah, than the previous one. Yeah, and also dig more into the kind of like the role of the replicants in this society. Much more explicitly state that they are kind of slave labour, and they're forced to be obedient. Wallace, who's the Jared Leto character, the new creator of replicants, who's taken over from Tyrell, has made replicants that have to obey. They can't rebel like they did in the original film, which is, an additional kind of quite dark and unpleasant detail in top of this universe. You really get the sense that in the universe of Blade Runner, and you're right to say that, yeah, it's like an alternative timeline. It's, the original Blade Runner is set in 2019, and I don't think by next year we'll have replicants and off-world colonies and a giant pyramid in the middle of Los Angeles.
Give it time.
Yeah. But this film is definitely a continuation on that alternative timeline to 2049. And you get the strong sense that things have got worse in the world of Blade Runner over the last 30 years. The environment has collapsed. Almost every living thing that isn't a human seems to be dead.
Yeah, there are no trees, I think it's heavily implied. There's another scene which also heavily implies that San Diego, as a city, is now basically just a massive rubbish dump for, like, the rubbish from Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, Las Vegas is just an irradiated wasteland, and San Diego is a giant rubbish dump. So, yeah, it was a pretty bleak future in the original Blade Runner, but this film successfully managed to make me think that I think they were better off in the Blade Runner of 2019, as bleak as it was, than they were in the Blade Runner of 2049. Things seem to have definitely got worse.
I mean, it's a sequel to a dystopia. Where else could you go but worse? But yeah, as well as the scenes where people just talk about what it means to be a replicant, there is quite a lot of talking, but it isn't just a long film of people speechifying at you. There is, usually quite a lot of big, glorious scenes and exciting action bits, and there's a weird sex scene about halfway through, which is an interesting sci-fi concept, quite sort of good and creepily visualised by Villeneuve. I enjoyed that. In a sort of, this is really unsettling way. That was definitely one of the big sort of high concept scenes of the film.
Yeah, it was really well done. Certainly the kind of technical work to make that scene work and be convincing was very, very well done. We guess we're dancing around spoiling the kind of actual dynamic of the scene. If you see the film, like, this is a really interesting scene, but it's worth coming to it. I'm not aware of exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, it was very good. I just want to take a moment to also say that there's generally the whole film, it just looks phenomenal. I mean, after films like The Matrix and the Star Wars, well, sequels and prequels and stuff, and these, and the Marvel films, these huge, lavish budget action or science fiction films, when they've got kind of the computer technology to create almost anything you want, you kind of feel, I've got to the point where I bet I've seen everything. Like, I can no longer be like marveled by how beautiful, spectacular a film looks. But this film absolutely blew me away by how beautiful it was. And it's sort of beautiful in a kind of dark and depressing way, but like the future Los Angeles, this kind of, you're just stunned by what it looks like, or the future Las Vegas with scenes of Ryan Gosling kind of just wandering through this kind of irradiated desert. Yeah, everything was just kind of so beautiful. And even just things like there's a scene when he flies over a dam. It's just this enormous dam and all the water pouring out of it, and it reminds you of something like from Dr. Zhivago, when they had to, shoot in real life kind of enormous dams because they couldn't build sets to replicate what they look like. And it was absolutely stunning. I didn't think I could be impressed by visuals to this degree anymore, but it was phenomenal to look at.
I mean, I guess the trouble is, a lot of the time, the amount of money required to do special effects on that scale often goes to, big action blockbusters, which will just go, right, it's a big robot shot in the way we normally do big robots. It's quite, I guess, unusual to give money on this scale to a director like Denis Villeneuve, who might be more prone to thinking, right, let's, focus on the beauty of it and the framing of it and creating the best possible picture. Because I don't know if technology itself is that more advanced than it was on, I don't know, whatever the last big superhero film was. But it's being given to someone who's thinking about it a bit differently in terms of, the exact angle of it and the colours and the framing and actually trying to make, this sort of strong image. Because, it is a film, but it's both clearly very technologically of now and very sort of doing slightly different things with special effects, but also calls back to the original Blade Runner. It's a very neat balancing act, which I think he's done surprisingly well.
Yeah.
It didn't quite blow me all the way away. I think Arrival possibly affected me slightly more. Still, to be honest, slightly struggling to put my finger on why. Possibly the end. I do remember thinking a few times during the last hour or so of Blade Runner 2049, are they going to be able to come up with an ending that really provides maximum resolution and maximum catharsis and really satisfies the shit out of me? It feels like they're going to struggle to put all this together in the remaining time. And although the ending was quite nice and quite sweet, I didn't feel like it did achieve maximum catharsis. I felt like the difference between this being a really good film and like an amazing masterpiece might have been a great ending. But personally, I didn't think they quite had, but that might just be me.
The ending, and again, we're going to dance around spoiling it.
I'm not going to say any more than that.
No, I'm not going to say any more really than that, well, than my take on it, which was that the ending leaves some kind of unanswered questions and some ambiguity, which is definitely in the spirit of Blade Runner. The original has, pretty much a definitively ambiguous ending. In fact, like the last thing in the director's cut, which is, for my money, the best cut of the various cuts to the original Blade Runner, the director's cut, I think the very last thing is a question, or a statement of uncertainty at least. Blade Runner is sort of built on a degree of ambiguity, so they maintained that, but for my money, the ending was good. It wasn't a letdown. Yeah, I was worried that it could have a disappointing ending or like a really obvious twist, but no, it did not do any of those things. It was good.
It was a good ending. It just wasn't quite a heartbreaking ending of staggering beauty for me. It was not a bad ending by any account.
You're right that the ending of, say, Arrival, I thought was maybe had a bit more punch to it, or something like that. But this film, had a good ending. Yeah,
I mean, it's about standards, really. I mean, the rest of the film, and as you said, the director's previous work, it just sets quite a high standard. It's like I don't go into all films expecting a heartbreaking ending of staggering beauty, but you allow yourself to have these expectations when you're in a film which feels like it could maybe deliver on it.
Yeah. The other thing about this film, the way it harks back to the original Blade Runner, is the soundtrack created by Hans Zimmer incorporates so many aspects or sort of like motifs from the original, but is also a thing in its own right, which is a good kind of summary of the whole Blade Runner 2049 film, in that it incorporates some of the best aspects, especially some of the best emotional aspects of the original film, but is also a complete thing in its own right. Like just the kind of booming sounds and sort of unusual kind of haunting synth bits from the original Blade Runner soundtrack that are Hans Zimmer has used in this soundtrack. I mean, and Hans Zimmer is obviously the ideal person to score a film, that's going to have kind of lots of booming, unusual noises on its soundtrack.
Yeah.
But the music was just, haunting and brilliant, and again, just served so much to create this kind of, the vision of this world that was kind of so bleak and so inhospitable.
Yeah, the music was very, I want to say overpowering, but I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because I think a lot of the visuals were meant to be quite overpowering as well, quite sort of massive and awe-inspiring. Again, I guess maybe it's about expectations. It's about, the fact that sorry, I'm struggling to put together my own ridiculous phrasing, but the soundtrack is writing a check that the visuals actually can cash,
Yeah.
The soundtrack is this massive, overpowering boom. And if it was just a picture of a man walking down a street, it would be ridiculous. But because it's this like awe-inspiring vista of, as you say, this gigantic dam or whatever, it does actually work. It does actually feel like they're in sync, and it's creating this sort of massive, overpowering sense of, whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
My most verbose critical moment there, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, it does. And the soundtrack was so iconic and such an important part of the original that there's no way that this film could be good unless it had a soundtrack of similar sort of epic proportions. And it really does. And I'd highly recommend seeing this film in the biggest screen you can possibly find, partly because it's beautiful to look at and you want to see it on a huge screen, and also you want to find the cinema with the best possible sound system because the soundtrack is amazing.
Yeah, as I say, we saw it in IMAX and that was good, although I also have a friend who saw it in IMAX 3D and he recommended not bothering with the 3D. So yeah, there we go. Well, according to our survey of like 3 people, IMAX 2D might be the way to go.
Yeah, I think we made the right choice there. We are now going to draw out one of the themes of Blade Runner 2049 for some additional discussion. Specifically, are human resembling robots a good idea? This is a theme that's touched on in a lot of science fiction stories and pop culture more generally, such as in films or books like I, Robot or in Terminator, Ex Machina, and of course Blade Runner. It's an interesting topic. As machines and robots become more sophisticated in our world, it becomes even more relevant. So, Nick, do you have a hot take on that issue?
To be honest, having thought about this for a bit, I think if we were going to break down my hot take on this issue, it would be, I'm not sure it's ever going to come up, because are we going to build them? I mean, I think, are human resembling robots a good idea? No. Partly because, as shown in all the sci-fi films, it's clearly going to go wrong, and you're going to end up with some robotic death machine, and partly because, even just from an industrial exploitation perspective, I don't know if we're ever going to get, like, mass humanoid robots in the way that Blade Runner seems to expect, because the way that, like, industrial robotics has developed, I don't really see much side, but what people really want is robot people, so to speak. It always feels like you build a robot specifically for the task you're doing it, wouldn't you? It's doing, rather. Yeah, the task the robot is doing.
The way I've looked at it is there's kind of two sort of sides to this. There's the moral side and there's the practical side. And on the practical side, it does seem to be a case that it may not be ideal for the most effective sort of robots automation to actually resemble humans. Partly because we've created a world full of objects that humans can interact with. And we kind of get the feeling that the best way of sort of developing robots is to create robots that are as close to humans as possible so that they can interact with a world made out of objects that are designed for human interaction. And then I think it's been pointed out that what would be better would be just to make it so that the objects can interact with each other and with people, rather than having to build like separate machines for interacting with dumb objects. This is kind of the thinking, I think, behind the Internet of Things, or the continuing plan to put microchips in as many things as possible, from thermostats to children's toys to your fridge. The idea being that we can bring the automation into devices that already exist to make them smarter and also make them be able to cooperate with each other, which I guess hopefully won't mean that like the robot revolution will actually be when a load of fridges and microwaves turn on their masters. But yeah, the idea that like making devices smarter is probably a better approach than kind of trying to build something that resembles a human to interact with dumb objects the same way that humans do.
Well, yeah, I mean, once you've actually built your human robot, all you've really done is successfully created the moral dilemma of every human robot film. It's like, well, great, now I feel bad when I switch it off. I don't feel bad but I switch my Internet of Things fridge off, as you say. I mean, assuming that, unlike Blade Runner, I could just switch off my robot with a remote or a button rather than having to use a gun. If I had to switch off my robot slave by shooting it in the face every time, A, that seems impractical, and B, I feel like I might start to find myself going to some strange places in my mind.
Yeah, you might choose to question the world you live in when you have to turn your TV off by shooting it.
I mean, that sounds quite cathartic, but yeah.
You might also be upset if you turn off your Internet of Things fridge because all your meat's going to defrost.
If I did encounter a future world where someone has built a house where every time they want to turn something off they have to shoot at it, I think I'd probably feel that was a good person to arrest first. Maybe that's too much preemptive policing, I don't know, but yeah.
Or a future when you try to turn off your microwave or whatever and goes, please don't turn me off, I don't want to die. Like, you're using too much electricity, you can't be running all the time, but I don't want to die.
Well, yeah, I mean, by not building humanoid robots, hopefully we can skirt around this. I mean, the thing is, the reason humanoid robots are in sci-fi films, as far as I'm aware, is to really put up front this metaphor of at what point does the robot just become a person,
Yeah.
And once your microwave is begging for mercy, I feel like it's probably crossed over whatever the point of self-awareness is and become a thinking being, at which point... Well, firstly, I don't really know why you need a self-aware microwave. It doesn't seem like something that requires a human level of problem-solving. If anything, it feels like torture to imprison a full human-level intelligence in a microwave.
There's a Red Dwarf skit about that, isn't there? How they put the...
the toaster.
They put, like a sort of sentient intelligence into a toaster, and obviously its view of the universe is like it's not really living up to its full potential. You know, it's kind of quite unpleasant existence. I think the Turing test is when a machine can convince you that it is a human being through realistic interactions. Although there's no way of knowing if it's just a clever trick or if it really is intelligent, which is a sort of a theme of Blade Runner 2049. You know, the K character has a sort of robot companion who he has a sort of emotional relationship with, and you're never quite sure if the sort of virtual assistant companion that he has really loves him back or if it's just a very sophisticated trick, because, you know, you can train a machine to replicate human emotions, but can you make it actually feel them?
Yeah, they keep panning over a billboard, I think, advertising that exact thing with the slogan, tells you what you want to hear, which does obviously then throw that character into question of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, again, another advert for human robots being a bad idea, if a person or something that has become indistinguishable from a person is saying it, you might be forgiven for starting to give it a bit too much credence or to place a bit too much of your emotional hopes in it. But then again, I mean, since we all on some level long for that level of affirmation, I guess that's why you build the fucking thing, isn't it?
Yeah. From the moral case for or against making humanoid robots, I feel some of the core of it rests on basically the idea that if you make robots that resemble living things, we will develop emotional relationships to them and emotional attachments, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, which is obviously what happens in Blade Runner. Interesting example from the real world is what some of the robots created by Boston Dynamics, who are a robotics company. And if you've never heard of them, go to YouTube and watch some of the videos of their robots, because some of them are scarily lifelike. But they created a robot called Big Dog, which is a sort of four-legged running robot, and it's very good at navigating the real world, the physical world, which most robots aren't very good at because, you know, they're on wheels and stuff, and wheels aren't great for a world that's been built by people who walk on legs. And Big Dog has legs and can kind of walk around and, you know, is pretty good at not falling over. It was designed, I think, partly for use in war zones because Big Dog can go out into dangerous areas and risk itself and remove the pressure on human life because it's just a machine and it doesn't matter if it gets blown up. But there was an unintended side effect of this, which is in tests they found out that the human soldiers kind of developed an attachment to Big Dog and will actually risk their own lives in order to save it from being destroyed, which completely defeats the point of creating a machine that can be destroyed and it's kind of no big deal, because inevitably people will develop attachments to things that even look vaguely alive, let alone human.
Well, yeah, they haven't even managed to build a humanoid robot there. Yeah, I'm glad that story didn't end with someone trying to have sex with a robot toaster. But
no.
Yeah.
But Boston Dynamics did create a humanoid robot, and that's worth seeing because it's really interesting. Like, there's a video of them, it walks along and they keep trying to push it over with a hockey stick, and it's clever enough that it can kind of stable itself and not fall down. There was a rumor that Google, who owned Boston Dynamics,
Of course they do.
when they saw this video, that they said they were worried that people are going to become too frightened of the robots, so maybe they should kind of cool it with some of the crazy humanoid robot building. But I think the fear that they were worried about the company creating was not so much a fear of these robots are going to take over and destroy the world. I think it was more people concerned about these robots will take away all our jobs because they clearly are about as capable as people, but never get tired, you know, don't make mistakes, all that sort of machine stuff.
But coming back to what I said earlier, surely the robot that takes your job isn't going to be a robot that looks like a person, is it? It's going to be a specifically designed robot arm that does exactly what it is you do.
It depends what your job is. If your job is more sophisticated than just what one robot arm can do, then it may require something that looks more human.
I mean, if your job is like an office, then to be honest, you're more likely to be replaced by a bit of software than you are by a robot. There's no point in creating a robot to press keyboard buttons.
No, there isn't. But there is a degree which they need to be intelligent. There is a view that to achieve intelligence and consciousness is in some way linked to the physical form that we possess. For example, if you want a robot that's going to learn in order to get as intelligent as people, because what makes people so intelligent is not the knowledge we're born with, and we're born with the kind of like hopelessly little intelligence, but the fact that we can learn and acquire intelligence throughout our life. So if you want a robot that will learn and get smarter to eventually the point of being able to do a sophisticated job like being a doctor or a solicitor, you would need to be able to navigate a physical world designed for and by humans in order to interact with the kind of the human world and thus learn from it and become more intelligent, which means it will probably need to have some physical form resembling a human. I mean, it can maybe be a sort of floating sphere thing that can go around, but I don't know, we don't really have that kind of technology, but we may be able to build something that can kind of walk and has arms and maybe talk a bit, plus the ability to learn would then become more intelligent.
Yeah, I still feel like that might be on some level just ego. I feel like the robots, it'll just become clear that there's actually a more practical form. As you say, that may well come when we have whatever technology is required to just have robots just hovering everywhere, which I'm assuming will have to have more or less solved the fossil fuels crisis by then. Because I imagine the technology required currently to just keep a floating spear constantly aloft might seem a bit indulgent.
Yeah. Well, obviously, a lot of these science fiction sort of theories of what robots could look like, which are sort of informed by science fiction to greater or lesser degree, do relate to a lot of other issues being solved, such as we need clean and efficient energy sources, or at least plentiful energy sources. Moore's law needs to hold. The hardware needs to continue to get better and better at processing data. We could reach a point when the robots can't get any smarter because for some problem with physics.
Is it the singularity when... What's the singularity?
The singularity is when the robots become self-aware. So they kind of like the fact you know that you are a person.
So for something like Blade Runner to actually happen, we'd need to traverse the singularity, and the robots would actually need to become fully intelligent and self-aware, which...
Yeah.
I remember reading news stories where they've said that in some levels research in like robots and AI has been held back a bit because they were a bit worried about traversing the singularity in case the things that happen in all the movies actually do happen.
Yeah, or they're concerned about their ability to restrain or manage software that can learn for itself. Obviously, computers can learn incredibly quickly because they process data much faster than humans do. In the Terminator film, what happens is they activate Skynet, it starts learning, and they become frightened by how quickly it's learning and how, smart it's becoming. It's really accelerating much faster than the humans thought it could, and they become frightened of it, so they try to turn it off. And because it doesn't want to die, it decides that Skynet will launch a nuclear first strike against Russia because the Russian retaliation would kill all the humans that are trying to kill it. So technically we struck first in the war against the Terminators.
I don't know, I guess maybe that just reminds us, especially in your modern computerized world, the self-aware computer is probably scarier than the humanoid bot. I mean, the humanoid bots in Terminators are just foot soldiers for the self-aware computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe realistically, our humanoid robots a bad idea should probably be put on hold till our self-aware computers a bad idea has been resolved.
Yeah, AI, or what's referred to as strong AI, in other words, an AI that's as intelligent and aware as a human, is a sort of a different thing. I mean, like in The Matrix, the AIs are as intelligent or more intelligent than humans, but don't have a physical form really in our world. But yeah, that's the kind of related to the issue, should we make robots that are as intelligent as humans, not necessarily resembling humans.
I don't know, I do kind of feel like humanoid robots are mostly a toy of the films. I'm not entirely sure the need to actually create like actual replicant-esque robots that actually look like people on the scale that they're talking about in those films is actually ever going to be necessary.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I suppose you might need a few of them for, I don't know, what are the purposes for having convincing humanoid robots? Spying and sex bots. A few for spying and sex bots. But aside from that, it seems a slightly pointless endeavour in creating these biologically perfect borderline clones.
Yeah. The other aspect against, or one of the other aspects against creating humanoid robots is the uncanny valley effect of having them, in the sense that being surrounded by things that sort of are human but sort of aren't human. It depends how realistic your humanoid robot is. I mean, they say in the Terminator film, the Terminator is completely realistic. It sweats, it has bad breath, it can pass very convincingly for being a human. The replicants in Blade Runner are, in the first one, that says the slogan is more human than human. As we've seen from Blade Runner 2049, they seem to have all the biological processes that people have. But if you created robots that basically sort of resemble humans a bit, but also don't in some crucial ways, you might end up in some very strange psychological space, especially if they're everywhere. Because being surrounded by things that kind of look human, but don't give off the subtle cues that we use to pick up from other humans. The way we can tell the difference between a statue and a person is, realistic skin, sweats, twitches and little blinks that kind of let you know what's a human, what's not a human. But if you've got something that kind of sits in between, are you going to end up in a world when you're walking around basically surrounded by walking corpses, things that look human but don't give off the signs of life? And that could lead to some strange psychological places. Certainly we're opening a whole new door of new mental health problems.
I see your point. Those sort of projected people that actually just lights on a bit of cardboard that you get in train stations do freak me out.
Yeah, so imagine a world surrounded by those all the time. We're a little bit more realistic as well, but not enough to really put you at ease to make you think that, there's another person.
Who's going to pay for this entire massive rollout of things that unsettle people? We did consumer testing. The consumer testing came back, your weird half-human robot freaks me the fuck out. They said, excellent, let's build 20 million of them.
Well, it's science fiction in that it might never happen. But also, there might be a profit motive. I mean, there's a big question over, is Facebook good for us? It seems to be turning us all into narcissists and enabling the rise of Nazism.
Narcissist Nazis are the worst.
Yeah, that hasn't led us to get rid of Facebook.
Yeah, but we actually like Facebook. Facebook doesn't freak us the fuck out, or at least it didn't at first. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think ultimately humanoid robots are just a way to dramatise. What if computers were intelligent, or what if robots were intelligent? I don't know. It doesn't seem like something you'd actually do.
No, it's probably not. I mean, there's lots of interesting things. There's robots can do lots of things people can't do, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be humanoid. Like, there may be even better shapes. Like, one of my favourite examples is Paro, the seal, which is what they've discovered is that all people with Alzheimer's, one of the best things for them, actually, is if they have a baby to look after, because babies make lots of nice... when they're happy, make nice reassuring noises that people with Alzheimer's and stuff respond well to. The obvious issue is you can't give someone with Alzheimer's a baby to look after, because what if they forget to feed it or leave it on the bus? So people have created Paro, who is a robot seal, who is fluffy, so someone who's got one can't hurt themselves, and it makes gentle and soothing noises that stimulates people with Alzheimer's and kind of soothes them and relaxes them. And yeah, it's more intelligent than just a fluffy box with a recorded message in it. It kind of knows if the person who it's supposed to be looking after, if they're not paying attention to it, in the sense if they stop paying attention to it, they might be distracted by the horrible sort of nightmare which is like to live with Alzheimer's. So Paro makes nice, encouraging, warm, friendly noises to draw your attention back towards it. Yeah, so it does a role that a human can't do, because you can't give someone with Alzheimer's a baby, but you can give them this little robot. But it's not humanoid, it looks like a seal. I think that's partly so people are less freaked out by it, because if it looked more like a baby, people will probably be more freaked out by it.
That has not yet risen up and taken over Japan.
So far, Paro the seal has not overthrown humanity, as far as we're aware. But I, for one, welcome our new
seal overlords.
fluffy, warm seal overlords.
Okay, so what we've learned from that story is that no, humanoid robots wouldn't work. Let's build fluffy seals instead.
Yeah.
If we can just universalise that, then our problems are over.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, more seal than seal.
I mean, that sounds like an advert for some sort of woodworking products, but okay.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay, and that was today's Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you for listening as ever. If you want more from us, then we are on the internet at moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find the occasional deleted scene and written pieces from myself and Alastair, including, in fact, a new written piece by Alastair in which he lists some of his favourite, slightly off the beaten track horror films of recent years for this Halloween season. So go to the website and check that out. And also, if you've enjoyed the show, if you're relishing our amazing new format, then feel free to go on iTunes and leave a nice review, because it helps other people find the show.
You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for Moderate Fantasy Violence, you'll see our purple logo appear. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast. I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at Alastair JR Ball, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on Twitter as @NickMB, and the long-threatened new fictional content has now appeared on my website. If you go to nickbryan.com, I might just this once actually link it in the show notes, or even more directly to comics.nickbryan.com, that I have started posting some comics I've been writing with, well, various people have been drawing them. This particular one is drawn by Chris Caesar, and it's got some comedy wizards in it. And yeah, if you particularly enjoy the comic, or if you've enjoyed my output as a whole over the years, I do also now have a Patreon page, because, to be honest, hiring artists is quite expensive, so I was finally moved to join the movement and start a Patreon. We'll see how that goes. And yep, that's, I think, all from both of us for this fortnight. Next time, cards on the table, we were sort of planning to do the Netflix Punisher series, which we believe was meant to have some sort of surprise drop over the next week or two, but that appears to have been put on hold due to the horrible mass shooting in Las Vegas, so we are instead going to do Star Trek Discovery, because that's a show we've both been watching, and it's an interesting thing that we think might provoke some opinions. So join us in a couple of weeks for Star Trek Discovery and a related question that we'll think of later. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Finish on more seal than seal. Just puts in a bit of like of Seal, you know, the sort of electronic.
A kiss for the voters, yeah, I'll splice that in.